I'm going to start off with introducing you to Ashley Carter. Ashley is a trial attorney for the Department of Justice in the Environment and Natural Resource Division, Natural Resources section. As a trial attorney, she handles a wide variety of environmental litigation, including Fifth Amendment takings and National Environmental Policy Act cases. Before joining the Department of Justice in 2020, Ashley served as a deputy city attorney for the city of Portland. At the city of Portland, her practice focused on advising client bureaus on environmental remediation matters, including Superfund and brownfields. Ashley also has experience in tort litigation and debtor-creditor actions for the city. Ashley started at the city as an honors attorney, and after graduation from the UO, Ashley was a judicial clerk for the Lane County Circuit Court. Ashley is a graduate of Yale University and the University of Oregon School of Law class of 2015. Ashley, if you could unmute and say hello.
Hi, so nice. Thanks for that nice introduction, Lorelei. And it's great to be with all of you over Zoom today.
Thank you, Ashley. Next up, we have Katie Carey. Katie Carey received her Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Studies from Seattle University in 2009 and a JD from Oregon Law in 2016. Since graduating, she has been an attorney advisor with the Department of the Interior, Office of the Solicitor, Division of Water Resources, Branch of Indian Water in Washington, D.C. She advises on matters related to natural resources, infrastructure, and federal Indian law. She represents the department in conjunction with the U.S. Department of Justice attorneys in litigation relating to water, irrigation, and dam issues affecting tribes. She drafts federal regulations and advises the department on policies for dams, Indian irrigation projects, and BIA power projects. While in law school, Katie was a legal extern for the Department of the Interior, Office of the Solicitor, Division of Land and Water, a clinical student at Harvard Law School Food, Law, and Policy Clinic, and legal intern for Oregon Senator Sarah Gessler, and legal intern with Food and Water Watch. Hi, Katie, if you could unmute yourself and say hello.
Thanks for that introduction. Nice to meet you all. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Katie. Next up, we have Libby. Libby graduated from Santa Clara University with a degree in anthropology and environmental science. While attending UO Law, Libby interned with the US DOJ Environment and Natural Resource Division and the US EPA Region 5 Office of Regional Counsel. After graduating from UO Law in 2017, Libby was a Presidential Management Fellow at the US Department of Agriculture, Natural Resources Conservation Service, with a 6-month rotation at NASA Human Exploration and Operations Mission Directorate. She finished her PMF program at EPA Office of Water. Currently, Libby is an attorney advisor for the EPA Office of General Counsel, Air and Radiation Law Office.
Thanks so much, Lorelei. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Libby. And last but certainly not least, we have Rachel Lipinski. Rachel is an associate at Van Ness Feldman and practices in the areas of natural resources, environmental, and maritime law. Prior to joining the firm, Rachel was an attorney advisor for the U.S. Coast Guard's Office of Maritime and International Law, where she worked in the Environmental Law Division. She advised the Coast Guard in environmental compliance, response, and enforcement matters. During this time, Rachel also served as a special assistant U.S. attorney prosecuting misdemeanor criminal cases. After graduating from the University of Oregon School of Law, Rachel served 2 years as a President Management Fellow at the Department of Interior's Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, focusing on offshore oil and gas issues. While at the University of Oregon School of Law, Rachel served as an extern for the Honorable Marco Hernandez at the U.S. District Court for the District of Oregon and as a senior staff editor on the Oregon Law Review. Welcome, Rachel.
Thanks for having me. Good to see everybody.
All right, we'll turn it over to you, Adell.
Okay, great. Can you bring the quick slides up while I'm just saying a few remarks at the start?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to be really brief this morning. I think the useful information is going to come from the panelists, but I do, and I'll say that my experience in information is going on 20 years old now. I graduated from the U of O in 1998 from this law school. So I want to just offer 2 quick thoughts, and then I'll go through a couple of slides. I'm really excited to see the 4 speakers we have today. They were all students of mine, either in class or through the ENR Center, and it's just really inspiring. I'm a little verklempt seeing them all and hearing about the work they're doing. So thank you, Lorelei and the Career Center, for pulling together these folks today. And they really represent just a few of the UO law grads who work in the federal government. The other thing I just want to offer is that all the work that these grads are doing and all the work that I've done, to the extent you've looked at that, I've done with my UO law degree. So one of the messages I really want to come through is that this is all within reach. I love having alumni speak because I think it helps when I was a law student, it helped me to see alumni who had sat in the seats that I was sitting in, doing things that I was interested in doing. So I hope it's also that today is informative, but also inspirational about what is possible with the UO law degree. If you could go to the next slide, Lorelei. So I'm going to hit on a couple of these big themes, and then I think as our speakers answer questions, you'll see these reflected in those answers. First, I want to encourage everybody to really understand that government work is public service. I think sometimes at U of O, we start to make distinctions between public interest and public service. And I think if you're interested in working for the federal government, that's a distinction that, I mean, I guess it makes sense to them, but I don't know a single person who works for the federal government, particularly in career positions, in agencies and at DOJ, that doesn't view their work as public service work. So I really encourage you to think about it in that context. I think it's really important when you're looking at a career or applying for jobs in the federal government to make sure that you understand the role of agency counsel, the general counsel's office in a particular agency or department, or the solicitor's office at Interior, versus the role of US DOJ, who are the litigators on behalf of the United States, whereas the general counsel's office are embedded in those departments and serve more as kind of almost an in-house counsel role or a general counsel role. It is different at the Oregon state level. So in Oregon, you would be at Oregon DOJ if you were both litigation counsel, or if you were an attorney advisor for the agency. And so it's just, when you go to apply at the federal level, especially if you've been familiar with the Oregon DOJ system, make sure you understand at a really broad level that difference at the federal level. And then it can vary by state. So this model of whether, attorneys are with departments or at DOJ, California, for example, looks much more like the US system, the federal system. So if you're applying for state jobs, it's good to just understand that basic architecture of how legal advice is delivered to those state agencies. And then certainly if you're applying for federal jobs, understand that, DOJ is litigation counsel. They stand up in court, as Ashley's probably done now, and say, I'm here on behalf of the United States. And the agency counsel can be deputized sometimes to do that, and sometimes appear as a special US attorney, but that's by special appearance. There is a relationship, I think, when you're applying for federal jobs between your substantive specificity and your geographic, your desire to be in a particular geographic location, and the relationship is an inverse one. So the more committed you are to a particular substantive area, the broader you're going to have to be in terms of your geographic scope, and the more specific you are in terms of, I want to be in this place, the broader you're going to have to be in terms of your substantive interest if you want to work for the feds. There are Washington offices and there are regional and field offices. We have alum that have landed positions in regional and field offices through direct hiring, but it's rare. In the federal government, it's my experience, at least. I'm curious to hear if others feel this way still. All roads sort of start or lead through eventually DC, and career advancement sort of happens through the DC loop. So it is important that you think about your willingness to spend some time in DC. Not everybody loves it. I did love it, just for what it's worth. It's a great city, but not everybody loves it. Nobody regrets it, I would say, right? I've never heard somebody say, you know, the really big career mistake I made was spending time in Washington, DC, even if it's just a year or two before you rotate out to a field or a regional office. USA Jobs is the place to look for positions. And announcements, as well as agency websites. It's a little confusing, and we can talk about this in this session, because you know, there are positions for which a law degree is very relevant and makes sense that don't have the word attorney in them. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. I think the GS level, which is the way federal jobs are graded, is a great way to limit searches. You know, look at GS 10, 9 maybe and above to find positions for that may make the most sense. And we can talk more about that. There are agency jobs that involve law through the PMF program, which we'll hear about today, through legislative offices, through planning and policy offices. And then there are jobs that are attorney advisor positions, which we'll hear about today. And those are positions to which attorney-client privilege attaches to the work. I was just talking to a student about this earlier this morning. So that's why it's important to look at job titles that are broader than attorney advisor, unless you really want to be in an attorney-client relationship and be delivering attorney-client privileged advice. You've seen with a lot of the bios here today that internships and externships are a prominent feature in these bios. They're not a requirement. There are plenty of people who secure federal jobs having not externed or interned, but an internship or an externship is a great way of indicating interest in the federal government generally, and in the content areas that you might be interested in. There are honors attorneys positions, which our career team, I think, is working to collate for folks. I believe we're seeing a bit of a resurgence with the Biden administration in the honors programs. Some of them had been on hiatus or had gotten down to very, very small numbers. And so I do think this is a very credible and fruitful entry-level pathway through these honors attorney positions. There is also direct hiring and lateral hiring, and I think we'll hear about some of that today with the panelists. The last thing I want to say just on these overarching themes is when you're taking classes and you're doing substantive work, and for those of you who've taken admin law with me, we do this is part of the course. It's really important that you pay attention to the agencies that are involved and figure out where they get their legal advice. It gives you your first clue to where particular substantive work occurs. And so, you know, the very cases that you're reading, if you pay attention there, you'll get your first clues about where environmental work is done and what agencies are involved. Can you advance, Lorelei? So I want to just talk about environmental. I think the advice I just talked about is good across the board, not just in the environmental arena. We have today's panel is focused a bit on environmental work. So I just wanted to use the area of environmental law as an example. There are more obvious agencies and there are less obvious agencies, right? So the obvious ones in the environmental field are EPA and Department of Interior, Council of Environmental Quality, and Department of Agriculture that houses the US Forest Service. And then there are less obvious ones. And so I encourage you to understand and spend time in the less obvious ones too, because there are fantastic career paths and fantastic jobs in some of these agencies. Department of Commerce, which houses NOAA Fisheries, the Army Corps of Engineers, Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, including the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. If you're interested in renewable energy or hydropower and dam removal and issues like that, river restoration, FERC is a very important agency for you to have on your radar. NASA, the US Coast Guard, as we see in the bios today, really all branches of the armed forces, and at the Department of Defense level. So, you know, there are obvious and less obvious. Environmental work occurs across the board. And so, you know, just keep that in mind as you're doing your searches and you're thinking about the work. There are also obvious job titles and less obvious job titles, right? And so there's attorney advisor, attorney, legal counsel, but then there are titles like, you know, I think you still have the title attorney when you're in an office of legislative counsel in an agency, or in an office of policy and planning, or NEPA compliance. And these titles go on and on. It's why it's really important when you're in USA jobs or as you're searching for jobs to apply for, that you cast your net broadly and really look at that job description and the GSA level and see what issues it works on. And then the last example I want to get is by way of example, I want to talk about not forgetting about Congress. Many of you have heard me say this before, but lawyers are not just for courtrooms or just for agency general counsel's offices. The knowledge and the expertise you gain in law school applies across the board, all branches of government. And it's an all branch of government strategy. And Congress, the Hill, the House and the Senate, there are a lot of people with law degrees up there. In DC, really, you can't throw a stick without hitting one. They're everywhere. They're thick. And that's both at the individual senators and representative level. They have general counsel positions, legislative counsel positions, and the committees oftentimes have separate staff. So the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, where Professor Dotson is right now, they have separate positions. So those Hill positions, if you want to work for the feds, there's the federal courts, there's federal agencies, and there's also the Hill. And so it is also important to pay attention to which committees have oversight over the agencies or the content of work that you're interested in doing, because, you know, if you don't get in through an honors program, you might go to the Hill, work on the Environment and Public Works Committee as counsel, and then a position opens up in the agency general counsel's office and you know folks and you move into that. So being aware of that work that happens on the Hill, I think, is another pathway to thinking about a career in the feds. I think that may be it for me. But can you advance one more slide, Laura? Oh, yeah, I'm not going to get into the details of interior because I want you to get to the topics. And Katie knows this better than I do now. She lives it every day. So you can turn off my slideshow, and Laura, I'll turn it back over to you for some questions.
Thank you so much, Adele. That was a really helpful overview. Okay. So I wanted to start off talking about the Presidential Management Fellows. So I'm going to be looking to you, Libby and Rachel. And want to let you all know, students, that I sat on a NOUT presentation yesterday by someone inside the PMF program, and they explored to or said, please have your students apply. They're greatly expanding it this year. Instead of having like 400 to 500 finalists, they are looking to accept up to 1,000 finalists, so doubling the number. And they said that they just have a lot of need in the various agencies. So they said this is a good year for students to put in. So turning, Libby and Rachel, can you guys give a brief overview, one of you jump in, of the Presidential Management Fellow application process, including any tips that you might have for 3Ls that are thinking about applying?
Sure, I could jump in first, and Rachel, feel free to add anything, because I think we applied different years, because mine was more recently in 2017, and I know things changed a lot because that was when the new administration was in place. And the last administration, and it was essentially good luck. And this is the only way to get into the federal government at that time. because no other environmental agencies were hiring outside of a fellowship program. So that application process is kind of vague. I've been through the process and I'm still not entirely clear what they look for, and neither are any of my friends that have gone through it. But they do pick a cert, at least from what I've heard from the program, is that they do consciously make a decision on, what your specialty is, because they don't want to pick everyone who's going to go into the military or something like that. So they try to spread across the board a little bit. But so once you are a finalist in the program, after they evaluate that, then you have to interview or contact agencies separately to kind of go through a matching process. So once you're a finalist, you're not automatically given a position at the federal government. You have to go through that extra step of then matching with another federal agency that's looking for somebody with your skills. And something I wish that I had known at least was that everybody wants a PMF, so you kind of have the negotiating power in that position. And I think things were a little different my year, but I wish that's something that I would have known at least a little bit more. And then, so I guess that's the application process if Rachel wants to add anything, but I can also talk to my experience through the program as well.
I think, Libby, if you could just talk for a minute, because I think it's really important for students to understand that with PMF, this is a centralized funding line that's not in the agency's budgets. So once the PMF program selects that first round, what Libby's saying is the reason you have a lot of negotiating power is this is additional resource that comes to the agency that they don't have to figure out how to pay for in their existing budget. And so I think that's what you're talking about, Libby, in terms of the negotiating power. So the agencies are trying to snatch up these people who have been through that first round of the PMF. So you do have some negotiating power. Is that a fair way to describe it, Libby?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, mine, I feel like the process has probably changed a bit since I did it. It was like almost a full day in-person interview once you were selected after like the preliminary test. And I don't know if they even still do that. But I'd say for when I did it, it was largely a personality test, which is interesting. I'd heard like at that time, the PMF process was based off of the Foreign Service exam. So friends that were going through that process were like, oh, we were kind of getting drilled on the same questions, like how you work in a group, how you deal with conflict, those sorts of things. But I would just, if anybody is applying and gets selected as a finalist, definitely reach out to me and I'm always happy to talk it through. I ended up at my agency, not because I applied, but because you can get, and I've done this, looking for PMFs, you just get a stack of resumes you can like go through online, and we would just cold call people that we really thought would be good for our agency. And that's how I was hired.
Thank you both. Well, switching back to you, Libby, can you just tell us a little bit more about the experiences that you got and how you were able to get a variety of experience through the PMF program?
Sure, yeah. So that wasn't entirely by choice, my path, because when I started, a lot of the environmental agencies were basically told, even through the PMF program, you're not allowed to have any. So there were no PMFs at EPA at all, which is very rare. I don't think that's ever happened since this last administration. And so I started at the Department of Agriculture because they were one of the few that were allowed to hire. So it was a very unexpected experience, but I was able to work on the Farm Bill, which was very exciting because I had no idea previously what was in the Farm Bill. But within that 2-year period of the PMF program, you have to do a 4 to 6 month rotation at another agency. And so that 4 to 6 month rotation came up. And again, you have all the negotiating power there as well, because the agency that you rotate into isn't paying your salary. So you're essentially working for them for free. So anybody you think would jump at the opportunity, but I was still in the same position, same administration. So no environmental agencies were allowed to take people on rotation. So I was looking into other opportunities and I saw NASA pop up and I thought, why not do an interview? It sounds interesting. And I went over there and they started talking about the environmental work they do and the new International Space Station policy plan that they were working on and planetary protection, all things I had never heard of, but all sounded really interesting. And so I thought, why not? I've never thought of NASA as an opportunity. And once I got there, I did a lot of informational interviews, which is something that I highly recommend. Everybody loves to talk about themselves. So why not take the opportunity to do so? That's how I ended up at EPA, was through a handful of informational interviews, is that I transferred into the EPA Office of Water at the end of my time at NASA. And I finished the PMF program there. And once I was at EPA, that's when OGC started hiring again at EPA once I finished the PMF program. And so I applied through USA Jobs, but it was an interesting process because they knew I was in one of the buildings in DC. So they called me up and just asked if I could walk over for an interview. And I was there for a few hours. So that's kind of how it was, very unconventional, but looking back, I'm glad that where I went and where I started, where I ended up.
Thank you. Rachel, can you tell us a little bit more about your PMF experience and how you were able to leverage that for your subsequent federal positions?
Yeah, I think quite similar to Libby. Once it's hard to get into the federal government, but once you're in, it's like a good deal. So I was similar that you're not guaranteed a position after your 2-year PMF, but at the time I was doing it, anybody that wanted to stay could stay. I ended up preferring where I did my detail, and it ends up, you come in from the outside and you don't really have a great understanding of what everybody does. And I found out that I was really interested in like international ocean and coastal issues. And it ends up that was happening more at Coast Guard than anywhere else. So I did my detail there. And then when I was finishing up my PMF, I was like, hey guys, remember that time I worked for you for 6 months for free? So you had a position open, and it was much easier to get in that way for sure. And for NASA, one of my favorite Coast Guard environmental attorneys went over there to be their NEPA attorney. We were so sad to lose him.
Thank you, Rachel. We're going to switch gears a little bit and focus on our panelists who can talk a little bit more about lateral hiring. Ashley, I was hoping you could give us a brief overview of your experience as an honors attorney with the city of Portland and how that how you were able to leverage that experience to join the DOJ.
Yeah, sure. So I don't remember if you said this, Lorelei, but I externed for the DOJ when I was in law school as well, for environmental enforcement section. So I knew I really liked that experience and thought I wanted to end up back at DOJ, but did want to stay in Oregon for a little while longer. So I applied for the city of Portland's honors attorney position, and that really appealed to me because of the variety of experience that I could get. And I think with all honors attorneys position, the amount of experience you get right away. I think that's true at the federal level, state level, Oregon state level, and at the local level where I was an honors attorney. So I got a lot of litigation experience. It was tort litigation, but I got to be in the courtroom, got to argue my own motions, second chair trials, and I got a really good experience in that, and also in advising on Superfund eventually, and brownfields as my career progressed at the city. That was more needed as I went on. So I knew I always wanted to end up back at US DOJ, and I kept checking USA Jobs pretty regularly for opportunities. And I used that experience that I had gotten through my local government honors attorney program to as a way to get in the door at DOJ, because they needed people with trial experience. And I think it's harder to find maybe if people have gone through private practice. I don't think you get as much experience as I did early on. So there were a number of interviews with different people who are on my teams now, and higher ups in the office and higher ups in DOJ. I can talk more about that if you want, but that's just an overview of how I used how my honors attorney experience helped me get to this position.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And Katie, wanted to have you talk a little bit about your experience going straight to the Department of the Interior Office of Solicitor, and what experiences in law school you think helped you set you up for success on that path.
Yeah, so my first semester of 3L year, did a full-time externship in DC at the Department of the Interior Office of the Solicitor. So I moved out here and I was a full-time intern, extern, which wasn't very common back then, but I do think that was key to me being hired. I essentially came through the back door after graduating. So Adell mentioned the honors program, and that's a really fabulous program. Our honors program window is actually open right now, so be sure to go on USA Jobs and apply if you're a 3L right now. But that program was shut down for about 5 years at my agency, and so most managers hire through USA Jobs, but then there's a handful that don't like to go that route, and because attorneys are considered accepted service, managers don't actually have to advertise attorney positions on USA Jobs. So they can just hire anyone they want. And that's how I got hired. Folks remembered me because I was a full-time extern. I was the only extern in the solicitor's office that semester, which was a far better experience than being a summer intern. I got to work with probably 20 attorneys when I was an extern, and some of those folks remembered me and recommended me. Yeah, I'm very lucky that it was really about connections for me.
So I have some general questions now that you guys feel free, panelists, to jump in. What advice do you have for students considering a career in the federal government, and kind of along the lines of what is the one thing you wish you knew when you were sitting here in their shoes? Feel free to jump in.
I wish I would have known that you can negotiate a salary even when you're going into government. I just assumed when I got the offer, I had to take it. And I came in at a GS9. And my other PMF that year from another PMF from Interior was like, why didn't you ask for an 11? And I was like, I didn't know I could. And so, yeah, that would be my advice. Even though you're super excited about it, still don't totally lose your head at getting excited, still ask for more money.
I think one piece of advice I would add, and that I wish I had known to do more, was do as many informational interviews as you can with people whose jobs you think are interesting, even if you think that it's not connected to what you want to do. Like I did an informational interview with somebody at Treasury, and at the end of it, I thought what they did was really interesting, but I don't have an economics degree, but they connected me with somebody else and know what to talk to. And so I think that's important, is that, even if you think a conversation might not be worthwhile, everybody has friends and everybody has connections, and they're happy to connect you with somebody who might do what you want to do. And one thing I didn't know until I got to somewhere like NASA is that they have a whole division that does environmental law. And so I had no idea that you could be a lawyer at NASA doing environmental law. I thought that it was just procurement or something. And, why would I be interested in that? And so that definitely opened my eyes.
That's really, I just want to double click on that, what Libby said, because it's the obvious versus the non-obvious. There's really not a federal agency that doesn't have an environmental compliance office. So environmental work is happening in every agency, And so if you're really interested in a federal career, those non-obvious places are important to look, I think. Sounds like that was your experience, Libby. There were some non-obvious ones.
Definitely.
I'd like to add on to what Libby was saying too. I do think relationships and connections are really important in putting yourself out there, meeting people in person. But then also, on the flip side of it, I think you've got to keep those connections going, and be really explicit and tell people you want a job with their office. I'm the intern coordinator for the Division of Water. And I've been doing that for about 5 years, and no one has come back to me and said they want a job or followed up after they've left our office. And that's kind of surprised me. So don't be shy. You know, you've worked hard as an intern or extern, and be sure to try and keep in contact with those folks that you've met that you want to work for.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone said so far. And just being on this panel and everything all the panelists are sharing, I do wish I had known all of that when I was in law school. The information shared by Professor Amos in the beginning alone, you know, was extremely valuable. So I would say, echo what everyone's already said, definitely do more informational interviews and to keep seeking out opportunities like you did today, to just get more information about federal government programs, but also to highlight how I got to my position, state and local government, because you don't know really what you'll like and find interesting. And law school as an intern or an extern is a great opportunity to explore different paths. So I encourage you to do that.
Thank you. Well, I'm really glad you guys all touched on that, because one of the other questions I had was, how important is it to know people on the inside? And sounds like you guys have all touched on that topic. Just wanted to open it up to, is there any other steps that you guys took to network or leverage alumni, faculty, or other resources that haven't been discussed, other than informational interviews or going back to people that you've worked with? Feel free to let us know.
I wanted to add that I think when I was working as an attorney, both times through at Interior, you know, the pace and cadence with which hiring may happen, especially direct hiring, is so random. It wasn't just random. I mean, Katie, I think the position that opened up that you ended up with, I don't think Scott knew he was going to have that, you know, even 3 months before he had it in the bag, you know. So what the goal is, that your resume is sort of in somebody's drawer, right? That they hang on, they know your name. And if an opportunity emerges because suddenly they get funding for something, or suddenly something shifts and they've got the ability to hire, they think of you, you know. To your point, Katie, about, you know, it's surprising that nobody's like, here's my resume for you to hang on to, right? I literally think, I mean, I had a file in my drawer of people that had come through and that I thought, if I ever end up with funding, you know, this is a person I would reach out to. And that's the thing, you know, lots of people want federal jobs. So they're not, you know, you gotta be in the hunt if you want one. Right? And it's possible, but
Okay, well, I want to be mindful of time and open it up right now to student questions, because we do have a class that starts at 2. So we'll probably have to end before the top of the hour to let those folks get set up. But so I wanted to open the floor to any student questions. If you're on Zoom, you can raise your hand and I can call on you, or Dean Ivanoff is in the room and she can also facilitate that.
Please go ahead. So my question is, what is some advice that you guys have on how we can stand out for those externship opportunities? And I know Professor Amos mentioned DC. Should we look for those opportunities in DC to go ahead and get our name around there? Just what's your advice surrounding that?
So many coffee dates I would do. I mean, I ended up in DC, but once I was there, I was getting coffee with people, I think like 3 times a week. Just, I think a lot like what Katie and Libby were saying, and Ashley, just like randomly meeting people and asking them to get coffee. And that way it just made you more, that way people knew your name when they knew your fellowship was finishing up, or if your internship or externship or whatever you're doing is like coming to an end, they'll remember you at least.
question. Other questions? Please.
How do we find out more about the Portland Honors Attorney Program?
Well, good question. And we're going to be sending out a resource that kind of highlights some of the federal and state, including the Portland City Attorney Honors Program that are currently recruiting right now. So they don't have their posting up yet, but that'll come later on in the fall semester.
Great question. Other questions? Please.
Can the PMF speak more to the application process?
I'll let Libby go ahead because I'm old. So mine was a while ago.
No, I'm old.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I mean, it sounds like the process might get an overhaul for this year, so I'm not entirely sure what'll happen because like Rachel mentioned, her year, there were in-person interviews. Mine, there were none. Everything was virtual. But it is kind of just a personality thing. I don't even know that I think they want to know more how you think and what you're interested in. And can you work with a group? Like, there's a very big focus on the PMF program that you're working in the public sector. And are you interested in public service? That's a very core thing that they talk about all of the time. But the actual application process is not entirely clear to me how it'll work this year, but I did see they sent out an email, I think it was yesterday, to all alumni that the application process, I might be wrong, but I think it's September 28th when it opens. So it's soon. It said, that they should be posting information about how the process works soon and how it might be different from past years.
Yes, and we'll be covering the PMF in the guide that we will be circulating. And in that guide will also be links. They have a very, very thorough PMF application guide that they said on the panel, information session yesterday, that should cover most of your questions. They also are going to have a full series of informational sessions. And that information is also on their website, and we link directly to that in this guide. So you can look at your calendar and choose to attend any of those sessions to get a little bit more detail about the application process.
Anna, did you have a question? You're on Zoom. I noticed your hand up, but then it went down. Sorry, it's my Zoom teacher, miss.
Hi, nice to see you, Professor Amos. Yes, thank you for calling on me. I was just wondering about internships because I was reading about how having certain externships perhaps, or having had previous internships could perhaps set you up for more, success in your application. Is that sound correct? Or I was just wondering what types of internships would be beneficial. Like I interned over the summer with a local state agency, but I understand that this is probably like, should I pursue something more federally, or should I apply for, judicial externships in addition? I guess it's kind of a loose question.
I'm happy to take a cut at that, and I'd love the panelists to weigh in. There's all kinds of conventional wisdom about this question. And the reason there's all kinds of conventional wisdom is that there are people who, like Katie, who I think the full-time externship felt like her path. And then there are people who haven't, and everybody here has extern. So this panel definitely biases towards you should extern. But I gotta tell you, I know a lot of people who have an extern who end up with federal positions. So I don't know that there's a clear path. What I would focus on is government service. I think these federal government jobs, they're interested in people who are interested in working in the public sector. That was that first point I made. And then exposure to particular content areas where the content you may be doing relates to the federal government. So, if you're wanting to work in the EPA water division, if you can't get an externship there, finding a job where you're doing stuff where you're dealing with the same content, whether that's, a job in private practice or a nonprofit job where you're interacting with the content. And then I think, I think Ashley's a good example of this. If you want to be a DOJ and litigate, especially if they're doing direct hires, so not right out of law school, but experienced people, they want people who know how to be in a courtroom. I don't know. I don't want to speak for you, Ashley, but I think that it sounded like that you felt like that made a big difference in terms of their interest, the reason you rose to the top of that pile when they were hiring directly.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It was my experience at that point. Did it hurt that I had demonstrated public service in the past? Probably not. But the courtroom experience definitely weighed above everything else. Courtroom and just litigation experience generally. Anna, to your question, I agree with what Professor Amos said, that having a history, demonstrated interest in public service will help. If anybody in the audience has already have experience in private practice, I don't think that could hurt, because as I mentioned before, as a law student, you're figuring out what your interests are, and maybe you did try private practice one summer, one semester, and you might have found out that's really not for you and you would rather pursue a career in public service. So you can work with the Career Center or think about how you might want to distinguish that or talk about that if you were in an interview for a federal position. I think you also asked Anna about externing for a federal judge or for a judge, and I don't think that ever hurts, that experience you get working for a judge. So that's definitely a great opportunity as well.
Thank you.
Lorelai, we might be able to take one more from the room. Any final questions? Okay, well, I just want to thank everybody here in the audience for being here. Lorelai, thank you so much for organizing this incredible panel. Panelists, thank you. Lorelai, I'll turn it back over to you for panelists' final comments.
Thank you. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Professor Amos. I wish we had, several hours with you guys, because I'm sure that you have so much more knowledge and wealth to share with our students, but appreciate all your helpful tips and advice. Thank you.
Don't forget how proud we are of you too. My mother luckiness is on like overdrive right now, so I'm anxious to catch up with all of you when this is done. So expect an email from me.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
As Lorelai said, that guide is going to go out later